Good afternoon, everyone. We're so, pl- we're so pleased to have you here for the inaugural Hope Lewis Distinguished Lecture Series. This has been a journey to get to this point, and we're so glad that you are able to join us today for this. My name is Deborah Jackson, and I serve as the Managing Director of the Center for Law, Equity, and Race. We have our two co-faculty directors, Deborah Ramirez, who is here, Director of the Civil I'm sorry, Director of the Criminal Justice Task Force, and Margaret Burnham, who is the Director of the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project. We will start this program by having some opening remarks from our Dean of the Law School, James Hackney, and he will be followed by Margaret Burnham, and then I will introduce our speaker and moderator for the event. Thank you so much.
So, welcome, hello, to this remarkable event in memory and celebration of our treasured colleague and friend, Hope Lewis. First and foremost, deep appreciation to Margaret Burnham for her leadership and vision in creating this lectureship, and for the care and love she extended to Hope and her beloved mother, Blossom. Long before I became Dean of Northeastern Law, I was a junior faculty member. Hope and I began our careers at Northeastern in 1991. So we navigated the halls of Cargill together for many years. There were numerous conversations about law school politics, our personal lives, and how the world would be a much better place if only everyone took the advice of the two of us on everything. We were young, ambitious, and convinced we could change the world, or at least remake our own corner of the legal academy. Hope was wildly successful at both. Being an intellectual historian, I'm fond of kind of pulling up books. I know they're kind of antiquated notion at the time, but I have two books that involve Hope on my shelf. One is her, really path-breaking text that she wrote with Gene Woods, Human Rights and Global Marketplace, Economic, Social, and Cultural Dimensions. It would be hard to overstate Hope's contribution in terms of looking at the intersection of race, identity, economics, and human rights. And if you take a look at the text of the book, it's really just masterful in its depth and comprehensiveness. And I know it took a lot to get this done, so it's a wonderful tribute to Hope. The second is a contribution essay that Hope wrote for an anthology, the title of which is Global Critical Race Feminism and an International Reader, that was edited by Adrian Wing. And Hope has an essay in the anthology under the section entitled Encounters with the F Word, Responses to Feminism. I could tell Adrian wrote the book because I could see Adrian's kind of working at framing. And Hope's title, Women in Paren Under, close paren, Development, poor women of color in the United States, and the right to development. Again, hope was at the center and the cutting edge of fusing critical race theory with feminism and human rights. Hope's scholarship was truly transformative. A good part of my conversation with Hope was the personal tutorial, basically a lecture to me, she would give me about international human rights, always enlightening me on events happening in the world with her acute and passionate analysis. I appreciated Hope taking the time to enlighten an erstwhile colleague, me, who spent far too much time ruminating about the philosophical implications of law spreading and torts. I was at bottom a theoretician. Hope had the brilliance and the heart to be not only a theoretician, but a passionate advocate. Indeed, Hope was at bottom an activist. As many of you here today recall, Hope was relentless. She was a passionate champion of the poor and disadvantaged around the globe and people with disabilities. Hope was the force behind founding our program on human rights and the global economy, the success of which led to the recent launch of our Center for Global Law and Justice. If Hope were alive today, she would no doubt celebrate this achievement while pushing us and me to do more. Another memory of my time with Hope was that whenever we'd meet in her office, she'd inevitably get a knock on the door with a student on the other side, anxious to speak to Hope about a pressing human rights issue or provide an update on research they were doing for Hope. Hope was a tremendous mentor and inspired a cadre of human rights activists, as I'm sure our new Global Law Center will as well. I share these stories in this brief intellectual genealogy with you today because while this event is to honor and recognize Hope's remarkable life and work, what Hope would want more than accolades and honors is for all of us to keep doing the work, to push each other as colleagues and friends. Let's continue to honor Hope not only through this remarkable lecture series, but by doing what she would be doing today if she were still with us, relentlessly fighting the good fight. Thank you. Margaret.
Thank you so much for coming to join us at this first Hope Lewis lecture. So thrilled as well to be here with all of you for whom Hope was a huge presence in your lives and a huge influence on your scholarship. We started this celebration of Hope's life and an inauguration of this series yesterday at a gathering where we heard from two of Hope's former students, Kalima Al-Noor and Danielle Ponder, as well as from my dear sister Deborah Ramirez and my dear sister and colleague Sonia Roland. All of them mentioned Hope's enormous generosity as a teacher, as a colleague, and as a friend. Danielle Ponder, whose voice all of us will hear in the future. It's a combination of Odetta and Nina Simone, and maybe a little Etta James in there as well. But it is a voice for the future. I'm sorry she's not here with us today, but she's on the road. She started off at this law school in these very classrooms and then decided that her real voice was not in a courtroom, but was in other venues where she could sing. And she told us that Hope gave her a book when she was a student and struggling in civil procedure and trying to figure out if she really belonged in these classrooms. You recall the part of, some of us are brave, right? And she used that book to, as the title of her first album, representing Hope's generosity as she made her way through the halls of the law school. And Kalima as well told us about Hope's generosity in providing support for her when she was her work-study student, her researcher, and work-study was, as sometimes we know it is wont to be, slow in getting her money. And Hope gave her a check. And Sonia told us about Hope's enormous generosity in introducing her to this place and introducing her to us, which is why she's here today. And it was that particular quality of Hope, her generosity, that brings us here today. She was enormously frugal in life and astoundingly generous as her own life came to a close far too soon. She and her mother bequested to Northeastern the resources that have underwritten the programs that CLEAR and CRRJ for more than 5 years now have been able to carry out. We are deeply grateful, as are the students who have benefited from those programs, and as are our families, communities, and clients really all across this country who have benefited. Without Hope, there would be no CLEAR or CRRJ. Perhaps CLEAR would never have gotten off the ground. So we would want this lectureship to endure far into the future of this institution so that we may perpetuate hope. I will also say that we owe thanks not just to our colleague, but as well to her mother, Blossom Stevenson, who was a nurse who raised her only daughter in Brooklyn. And then when Hope was no longer able to take care of herself, she left her profession and she moved up here to Boston to take care of her child. I would be remiss if I did not say that at the end of Hope's life, she had friends across this law school, but she particularly depended on two of her dear colleagues, Wendy Parmet, who helped Hope navigate a difficult and challenging medical world for many years, and Libby Adler, who had been Hope's student, and then became a close friend of Hope's and of Blossom's, and after Hope's death, continued to visit Blossom. The four of us, myself, Wendy, the dean, and Libby were all there when Hope passed away. Hope signed her missives with the words of thinkers from whom she took inspiration. From W.H. Auden, she wrote, "How do I know what I think until I see what I say?" And from Zora Neale Hurston, she captured this: "Research is formalized curiosity." The line most emblematic of Hope herself was Gwendolyn Brooks. "I wrote about what I saw and heard on the street." Hope's streets, running through remote Haitian passageways and Brooklyn barrios, offered up complicated testimony about law, pain, privilege, and possession. Hope mastered them like a gifted linguist, as fluent in patois as in fine print, and she wrote about them in blogs and scholarly articles titled Playfully and Subversively, Lion-Hearted Gals Face the Dragon and Ms. Lou. Even when illness trapped Hope in her Brookhouse apartment, she incessantly roamed her streets. What I miss most about Hope is her bravery, her gentle humor, her preference for simple and frugal living, but mostly, I miss her mind, ruminating and running, often out loud, so meticulously along the streets she wrote about all her life. It's that loss, still so many years after she's gone, that still makes me weep. I thank you for joining us to remember her and her work, to give her work long life, and to commit to its centrality in all that we continue to do here at Northeastern University School of Law. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for those words from the Dean and Professor Burnham. At this time, I'd like to introduce our inaugural Hope Lewis Distinguished Lecture. Today we are joined by Gay J. McDougall, whose work has consistently challenged inequality. She has worked on the fault lines of race, gender, and economic exploitation in the American context and in countries around the world. She was a recipient of the MacArthur Genius Award in 1999 for her work in pursuit of global human rights, and in 2015, the government of South Africa bestowed on her their National Medal of Honor for Non-Citizens, the Order of O.R. Tambo Medal, for her extraordinary contributions to ending apartheid. She currently serves as the Vice Chair of the UN Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, on which she has served for 12 years. McDougall is currently a distinguished scholar in residence at the Leitner Center for International Law and Justice at Fordham University School of Law. She's being joined today by our very own Professor Zenaida Miller, who holds a joint appointment in the School of Law and the International Affairs Program of the College of Social Sciences and Humanities. She has written extensively on transitional justice and human rights, focusing on inequality and structural violence, and serves as co-faculty director of our new Center on Global Law and Justice. I invite you to help me welcome them to their seats, Professor McDougall and Professor Miller. Thank you so much.
Hi. Are you on?
Just a word before we begin our back and forth, because I cannot help but join the eloquent voices that I've heard yesterday and today, speaking of so many things that Hope was in her life. I just want to add that I met Hope in the 1980s when she was doing a fellowship at TransAfrica in Washington, D.C., and I was there leading the South Africa project of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law, which I did for 15 years. But, you know, those were early days of Black women doing the things that we have done and that we do now. And Hope spent her fellowship doing a little booklet on Black women in international law and policy that, you know, had all of our pictures and little things about us. And it was the first step to creating a community. And I thought, how important little things can be. And she really was critical in starting to build us into, a force, a group, a conversation about the things that are important to us in international law and policy. The last time I saw her was in Geneva, when she came, and Margaret accompanied her with some students to attend a meeting that I would have every year. It was a forum for and on minorities around the world. And there were about 500 people that would gather every year to talk about minority issues and to start to build that sort of common voice that's so critical in moving things forward in institutions and around the world, and then back home, wherever home is. And I so appreciated her making that long journey at a time when she obviously was not the best physically that she had ever been, but spiritually she was hope. And she brought her students to speak for themselves in that forum, and I think it was hugely important to them, to me, as people from my home coming, to everyone. So Hope had a way of touching so many. And although we were not close friends, we were always aware of each other. And that book, by the way, on economic and social rights that she wrote with Jean Woods, was critically important at a time when the human rights industry, if you will, certainly in the United States, was still refusing that economic and social rights were rights. But of course, for people like Hope, for people like Jean, for people like me, it was self-evident. And so she really made a tremendous breakthrough and contribution. So I just wanted to start with that.
No apologies, quite the opposite. It is, thank you for that, and thank you for all that made this event possible. I feel enormously privileged to be sitting here with Gay, to be sitting here in memory of Hope, to be a part of this program in any possible way. Hope's work meant an enormous amount to me and to my teaching as well. So, and it's just a great privilege to be sitting next to you. So let's launch in and let you say some things to these people, some more things. So I just want to start basically by quoting you back to you. A couple of years ago, you co-wrote a piece in which you talked about how the UN has been a vibrant and urgent site of advocacy by civil society and social movements who've leveraged this global platform to fight racial justice battles that could not be won through purely local, national, or regional strategies. You also, in the same piece, talk about the limitations of the UN architecture, particularly in areas such as racism and racial discrimination, such as focusing on violations by states within their borders, and wrote that the effect of that is to curtail sometimes the potential legal and policy interventions available for undoing the racial constraints on the self-determination of formerly colonized or enslaved peoples and nations. So I find that to be a very productive tension, and given your vast experience and work, I wonder if you would reflect a little bit on that architecture and what it offers and what it doesn't.
Okay, so knowing that you were going to ask me that question, I brought this. What is it up? 2 seconds, okay? Okay. First of all, when I first went to the UN as an elected individual on a human rights body, as opposed to as a lobbyist, which I did for several years, I entered a room, first meeting, had about 1,000 people in it, if you count the delegates, government reps, and interpreters, all the other people there. And I was the only African American. No, I was one of two, only two African Americans there. And, you know, it sort of struck me. And I was soon on a mission to make sure that that changed, because we had no standing in international law at that time, no legal personality in that very technical, traditional way that international law recognized at that time. But just to show you, the first, after that, the first body that I've sat on, and that I'm still sitting on, is the treaty body that oversees the International Convention Against Racial Discrimination. And it is important in that governments come to us one by one by one, 180. We're the most recognized treaty in the human rights conglomerate of treaties. Except for the one on the rights of children, which we don't sit on. We ain't into children. But anyway, or children's rights. But anyway, so I was the first American to sit on that treaty, and I have now 12 years on that treaty body. But when I first came, that was the only thing that existed that related to us. Soon after, it was, we got the special rapporteur on racism. That was very important because this is somebody who goes country by two countries, has the right to visit countries, and speaks out with a little more of an independent voice. And then we added the real tremendous thing that happened, and I am very proud to have played an important role in, was the Third World Conference on against racism that was held in Durban, South Africa, shortly after the a great success that South Africa had had. And so it hosted the world in making a decision about what's next on the agenda after the end of apartheid. We also got out of that, we created a new group called the Working Group on people of African descent. And the question there was, we're going to recognize the legal personality of people of African descent, and we're going to create a body which carries that forward. And every year visits different countries, takes them on about their policies, et cetera. And it still exists. So, you know, that took 20 years after I first got to the UN, to that stage. And then it took 20 more years for anything more to happen. And what happened was the murder of George Floyd. And in that moment, we were able to push the UN to do something. They didn't do what we asked them to do. You never give what, you know, you ask for. But what we did get is this new body that looks at law enforcement and the ways in which law enforcement carries out the sentiments of racism in countries where they are, against black people, of course, and racism being the kind of thing that's directly connected to the transatlantic slave trade. We also got the High Commissioner to make some bold statements about the transatlantic slave trade, about the degree to which there was still denialism among governments about recognizing the ongoing harms of the transatlantic slave trade and doing what's right, actually repairing the rifts that had been caused. And so she called for reparatory justice, which is a word that I think was put forward in order to soften the blow. You know? And then after that, we have been able to put in place, just to rush through this, the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, which is now in its third year. And in that very same room where I was the first day or so that I was elected in 1997 to a body, now that body, at least twice a year, there's a convening of 900 people of African descent from all over the world, talking about common issues and pushing the UN in lots of different and very important ways that I won't go into because we don't have the time. So.
Well, maybe this will also help expand that, because I think, right, there are about a million follow-up questions on all of those aspects of it. But one I know that is very pressing on many people's minds today is, we're in a rough moment, one might say, for rights in general, for human rights certainly. And I'm curious about your thoughts, given your experience, on what feels new and different right now since January 20th and what doesn't. What feels like, the fights are very much the same. How much do our tools in human rights need to shift with this moment? So we are familiar with, we do a lot of reporting, we do a lot of naming and shaming, we do a lot of fact finding, we do a lot of things, we convene fora, and they can feel inadequate in moments of urgency. We do a lot of protest and social movements and many other things too, litigation. And so I wonder, sort of how much you feel, this moment is shifting how we should think about human rights. How much is it a continuation in the sense that, certainly massive human rights violations that, in many of the places in the world, from Gaza to here and many other places, have been ongoing now for a long time. That didn't start in January. So how should we be thinking about this moment?
Well, I think there's no doubt that everything has changed. And I think it has changed in a way that has forced us to realize that a lot of what we have been doing is just over. It's been over for a while. And it's not been effective for a while. But we haven't been forced to make any real changes. I think that all of these sort of agreements that the world powers came to after the Second World War, they're over. Maybe they've been over for a while, but this has really changed things. And I think if we don't realize it as soon as we can, we will not be able to make the kinds of decisions we must about our own new tactics. We have got to build a world order, and we have got to build a national order that's not dominated by hyper-capitalism. Even the UN, when it comes down to it, the US pays 24% of the budget. Now, nobody's going to say it out loud, but that means that if the US doesn't like it, a lot of policies won't be made. The U.S. tried to stop us and did when we were lobbying during George Floyd's murder. This was during the Trump Roman numeral 1. That's the way the history books will have it in the future. And he sent people from the U.S. permanent mission to the hallways of the UN Council on Human Rights that he had pulled the U.S. out of, which is why they weren't in the room, right? So he had withdrawn us from that. But he sent his diplomats down in the halls to threaten people's foreign aid packages if they voted, for what we were putting forward. And they know who to threaten. They threaten the poorest of them. Right now, Africa, the African group, is the largest group of states in the UN. That's the titanic shift since the 1940s when the UN started. Now they're the largest group. But, the economies are such, the global economies are such, that they're still the poorest group of states. Poorer than Asia, because Asia has China, and Japan, and et cetera. So it means that still the policy grip of the world body of the United Nations is in the hands of the U.S. because of our GDP, we pay 24% of the budget. The world cannot go on. Our next era of world peace cannot be based on this, because the consequence is that we are now in an era where our new leader of the U.S. can make policy, both international and domestic policy, by extortion. And that's what he's doing. He's certainly doing that even to Ukraine. He's doing that in terms of the U.S. He's making domestic policy by extortion. He owns the Republican Party now. He owns most of the courts now. He is trying to own the legal profession. He's trying to own the universities. So he's making policy by extortion. So naming and shaming is missing the point. Unless we can find a way to break the grip of this hyper-capitalism that rules our globe now, it's hard to find another basis for human relations, for national policy, for global relations.
And so I guess one question that I have follow up on that is sort of, so how do we think about, especially given what has brought us here today and in whose honor we're talking, the sort of the language of rights, the language of, particularly economic rights, but, more generally, how do we think about that in relationship to the kind of hypercapitalism you're talking about? So what's the, how do we think about the match or mismatch between, and there have been, long raging debates, obviously, in the fields about how much economic rights, can help push back against the kind of political economy of vast structural inequality. And, I was going to also ask you about South Africa, so, I have that in my mind too, but I just wonder if you can frame it for us a little bit, where you see the human rights language in that kind of struggle.
Well, when I am in other countries, particularly countries in the global south, the human rights language has always been quite different. And it's always been about economic and social rights. And it's always been about the unfortunate rift between the global north and the global south. One that the global north in many places doesn't even realize. It's always been about, foreign aid being a transaction. And, it is. I'm sorry that it's gone now. but because the lives of a lot of people have been depending, unfortunately, on foreign aid. Even many of the forces that I deal with, the progressive forces, have to some extent relied on the kind of assistance for rule of law programs that have disappeared in a day. But the fact that we no longer have UNRWA, we no longer have the World Food Program. Now, the Secretary of State will say, oh, no, we didn't cut off food and medicine. But it doesn't seem to be the case. I'm called, by people around the world to say, well, the vaccines are in the warehouse, but we can't get them. Oh, the food, stop coming. So we have to find another way. But I think that what this is doing is that it is validating the call from the global north to the rest of the world for us to hear and act on, that there is a reason for the recognition of economic and social rights. And it's not, the reason is not one of charity. It is really based on mutual existence and respect. And this maybe is going to prove that more than anything that you or I have been saying in so many ways previously.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more, and then we'll open it up because I'm sure there are questions from the crowd. So the last question I wanted to ask was indeed about your experience in South Africa. So you had long and robust experience in the anti-apartheid struggle, and that was a pretty long fight, and it was a fight in which many of the institutions were fighting under repression for a very long period of time, including many in the legal profession. And I think there were many questions, as I understand it, for a long period of time about how you do that fight under an oppressive regime, right? When are you becoming a facilitator? When are you fighting against it? How do you use the systems and institutions? And I don't want to draw an ahistorical parallel, but I will say we were living in oppressive times. And
Yes.
so I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the lessons you've learned and what you can, how you've thought about that and how you're thinking about it now.
Well, I think the most important lesson I learned is that we can win. But I think the second lesson that I've learned, especially recently, is that, it's, you have to, even after you win, you have to keep being vigilant. And you have to, I remember the various debates because South Africans were good at debating all the various ways, and that's what was the source of their strength. That internally in the struggle, they were always debating, and there were always many different sides of the debate, and they were all brought up, and they were all thought about, and people changed. Some people changed their minds. So that's a real strength that we have to maintain. It's losing favor in this country, but we have to maintain that because it really is. And there were always debates. So one of the debates that they were having constantly was theirs to be a one-phase revolution or a two-phase resolution. In other words, should they go for civil and political rights? And then, once they get those, go for economic, social, and cultural rights. It was real because in the other countries that had gained their liberation before. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and in Namibia, they cut a deal to get the first phase, civil and political rights. But nothing was to be touched in the society as to economic, social, and cultural rights. So even within the bureaucracy, right, none of the bureaucrats were to be fired. So they had to set up a dual, a parallel bureaucracy. And that was so throughout the whole society. And certainly the central piece of apartheid was that the whites had all the land. And they couldn't change it initially because they went, long story short, they obviously went for the one stage. They got civil and political rights, and they couldn't. So this was a problem. And it's been a problem, a persistent problem throughout all of the years after 1994. They never got the economy. And you go to the townships, there are a few more nice houses, and there are a lot of people who used to live in the townships that now, moved and are in nice neighborhoods. We know that story here, right? But basically, there was no structural change that affected the vast, vast majority. So South Africa's been on a rocky road since 1990, since Mandela died, for lots of reasons that we could discuss also. But now they have a president that's trying to set things right. And one right thing that South Africa has done that made the world cheer was that they have been faithful to Palestine. And their argument before the International Justice, the Court of International Justice, the ICJ, was just phenomenal. It was glorious. It was, what we all wanted. But they're being punished for that. They're also being punished for the fact that now they're trying to do land reform, because even now, 7% of the population, which is white, owns 70% of the land. So now, after all this time, the new president, fairly new, not totally new, saying, look, it's time, let's really change this. And the plan is not to disrupt any farmer's future. It's only going to touch land that is not and has not been being developed or used. But for this reason, Trump has cut off foreign aid for these two reasons. Cut off foreign aid. He has offered to the white minority, at least the Afrikaners, refugee status. And so something like 67,000 have registered to come to the United States. But, this is, so what do I think about South Africa? I learned a lot. I could talk for 2 hours about lessons I've learned from that day and how I've tried to implement them in the work that I've done. But the one thing that they were not was vigilant. Or let me say it another way. When they wrote their Constitution, they were optimistic. They just didn't want to entertain the possibility that there would be bad doers that would try to, influence people, take over. So there were no anti-corruption mechanisms in the Constitution or in laws or in any way. Well, we were like that until, what was it, Nixon? That's what, you know, that's, so, they learned that lesson. But, and now they're learning, and they've learned the lesson that they should have gone. They should have maintained, they should have held out for economic rights in the beginning, because you only get one chance to have a revolution. So that's, you know, I just keep learning lessons, we all do. But, you know, when the principled among us gets penalized and persecuted because they're principled by the powerful, like Trump, that you know that's like the last sign to all of us that things have gone very badly, very wrong, and we all have to do something.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to give a chance to folks in the crowd to ask questions. You can take my mic.
Hi, thank you so much for your words. I've had the honor of going to interact with like the international legal system at the UN through the Program for Human Rights, so it's great to hear about Hope's legacy and to hear so much about the work that you've done. I was wondering what policies or ways of interacting with the international legal system do you see as being more aligned with the revolutionary purposes of shifting the economic foundations that it would be based off of?
Well, it's hard to say right now. I don't have a playbook yet. But I think that you got to start at home. You know, there's so much in the UN. The UN is basically, in the end, a club of states. So you can't really get to that point without changing the states. And one of the things that I think we have to get control of what's happening here. That's our first obligation. But we also, I think, need to be in solidarity with other countries that are trying to find ways, like South Africa. We can't let them be persecuted without everybody trying to show solidarity to them. We have to support the organizations like BRICS, you know, which is a new organization of global South states that's trying to find a different way and find a power among themselves and be able to speak with that separate power. There's a new organization that's just started in 9 countries. I don't know if you know of this. It's very new. And they started in Geneva, so I think they might call themselves something like the Geneva Group or something. But it's, you know, so we have to find ways to support these other formations that are trying to, well, Europeans, yes, they're fine, you know, they got to find a way to make their own policies without the United States dominating them. So I'm not sure yet how you do that, but none of it can happen without our changing the situation here.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. Very interesting. My name is Sonia Roland. I'm a faculty here, and I guess we saw each other last night. My work is on international economic law and development, and I presently find myself in this strange place where for, 2 decades now I've been criticizing the World Trade Organization and the shortcomings, both institutional and substantive, of multilateral institutions, while of course wanting just a better multilateralism, right? Better institutions, because I think they're necessary, right? They're better than not having those institutions. And then that seems an all the more pressing concern right now. But I wonder, okay, well, do I want to tone down the criticism? Is the shift, or not tone down the criticism, but is now the time to emphasize even more the need for multilateral institutions, even when they're flawed? And how do we not excuse the flaws while defending a system of multilateralism and cooperation?
Well, it's a very tight rope to walk. I wrote an article on these mechanisms with another international lawyer, a black woman, and it was like a dance we were trying to do, to both say these are important. They're important for civil society to use them, to engage in them, but also to critique them, because they are quite limited, and they are all sort of internally focused. They are siloed, even with the more of them. They are the new ones are their own silos. But also, we are forced to see things as all having their beginning and end, and within the nation state, which is not the way the world works anymore. For example, we did this. I was ran the urgent action procedures of CERT, and our brief is that we can, while CERT is very routine and there's a formula and, we go state by state by state, we had we were the fire trucks. Something happens, call us, and and I wanted to take that kind of a mandate and also say, well, the fire is on our borders, or the fire is actually in the WTO. And while, one of the main tenets of international law and international human rights law is that states are responsible for things that happen within their borders. But what if the state made something happen over there, like in the WTO? A good example was the pandemic, and the way in which some states hoarded the vaccine technology, all the kinds of mechanisms and tools necessary to make vaccine distribution, to get from the idea of the formula into injection into the arms of societies. All that was limited and hoarded by certain global north states. And all this was going on in the WTO. Used to presumably go on in the UN, but now the UN offshores, or states offshore things to other institutions. And what that means is that people like me that spent my life doing this sees the effects of racism actually taking place in another institution. And now I can't even touch it. I can't talk to the WTO. I can't send my missive over there and saying, wait a minute, you got to open up this thing so that all kinds of people around the world can get it, or else it certainly looks racist to me. So that's a very serious problem, and it's so totally limited the UN and limited these new institutions that we've been able to create within the UN. And so we've got to, you know, if you are a player within the WTO or the WHO or any of these others, it's very important that we start making collaborations among ourselves outside in various hallways so that we can start using what strength, what power, what influence we have to open up those silos. Because racism, you know, I mean, it started out as one of the first globalized transnational, you know, operations, and it still is. So I would say that many things, most of the things that are affecting us locally are just a local manifestation of something that's very transnational, maybe global. And so let's not kid ourselves that we can make total eradication of problems here without interacting with the supply chains elsewhere. So we've all got to have, and all of our organizations have to have lines of communications with people around the world so that we can have transnational effects to what we're doing here at home.
Hi, I'm Dan Danielson. I'm also on the faculty here. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for coming to honor Hope. We miss her every day. I want to push in a slightly different direction. I've taught for many years law and development. I work on economic power, corporate power in the global system and its impact on development. And for the last couple years, actually since the pandemic, I've been in a small group of scholars that we call ourselves law and regions. But what we're trying to think about is the region not as a necessarily geographic contiguous space, but rather a way of thinking about connections and interdependencies that don't fit into established jurisdictional boundaries, which could be smaller, it could be a part of a city, or it could be multi-states, but personally, I'm feeling very pessimistic about the likelihood that states are going to lead on many of the issues that are most pressing for humanity at the moment. And so I'm trying to think of other ways, other sorts of formations, other modes of facilitating experimentation, possibility, responsibility based on interdependence. You know, one person in a recent workshop that we had, said we need global values chains, sort of modes of, with the idea also of a kind of pluralism that recognized coexistence in the way that the sovereign system was supposed to, but also has failed in some ways. And I just don't know what you think about that, because for someone who's committed your whole career to building sort of a universalizing discourse, even as you critique it, this feels like a really different turn. And it feels more promising to me, but also it's untrod territory, right? It's really new space that requires social movement, rather than some imagined political consensus is going to move us forward. So I just love your thoughts.
Well, you're right. I think that is a good summation of where we are right now. However we got here. One can say that actually all the things that we've been doing brought us here. but we also must say that all the things we've been doing are going to take us forward. Because we see where all of the, fallacies have been, the mythologies that we've relied on, in the past. All of that, we see that. And we must start again. And I'm not saying, it's a time when there's irreparable harm that's being done. I mean, irreparable. And I don't think we can make it, there's no way around that. That's not on us. But, a lot of times that's the realities that lead us into the next thing. And I guess our responsibilities now, especially as thinkers and doers, and we have to have thinkers and doers all together, is to resist where we can and must. And there are some places, lots of places where we must resist. But I think that we are the ones that have to think through what the next playlist needs to be. We might not see but so far. But one of the things that we've been missing, in my view, is a playlist, our own playlist. What do we see as our future? What's the future that we want? And not just in little pieces, but in larger things. And now we must think about the world. But, we have trouble in our organizations even making a strategic plan for the organization. But we have to go beyond our organizations, beyond our communities, beyond our world, because that's where, the next playlist has got to be, is beyond our world, beyond our countries. And it's our responsibility to do that thinking and to figure out how, and it's groups like the one you're describing that should interact with other groups like that. But that's I think our personal agenda for right now.
I know our time is coming to an end. I'm sorry. I think, yeah. So a quick shout out before my thank you. So the shout out is that the Center for Global Law and Justice and Black Law Students Association have coming up. There's a flyer right over there next week on Thursday at 3 o'clock in the Cabral Center. The very amazing and distinguished lecturer Ann Orford from Melbourne Law School and Harvard, who will be speaking on human rights activism and climate justice. So I imagine that could be a crossover for people who were interested in this. So if you like this, you'll love that kind of thing. So come out and see us again next week. And with that, I just want to extend just immense thanks to Gay McDougall for being here, for taking the time, for your inspiration and expertise, for helping us honor the memory of Hope Lewis, to everyone who made this possible. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you all.
Yes, let's thank our guests.
I can't. Rose can. Rose can.
Thanks, Lib. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I'm Rose Zoltek-Jick, and I have the enormous pleasure of being in law school with Hope. And then when I joined the faculty here after she had been out, when she joined the faculty, we kind of knew each other already. And when she died, I decided that I would honor her memory by taking her office. So for those students here who come visit me, you are sitting in Hope's old office. And I kept a bunch of things that Hope left in the office, including the rock garden that is on that table. And amongst the fabulous qualities that Hope had, that I think are really evident here today and really on display in this room, are the thinking together with the activism that Professor Burnham spoke about. But I think also was a certain calmness of character, a certain centeredness and groundedness of knowing who she was always, even as challenges, particularly of health, changed her. And she would, I know, use those rakes to rake that sand and change it over and change the world as it was constructed in this very little rock garden that she played with to also keep her centered and grounded and calm in the various unbelievable challenges that she faced when she went from, could we flash back to that last, the picture of Hope so that we could end kind of with that? Thanks, Jen. Okay, so there's Hope. There's Hope as the young teacher. And that's Hope at the end. And there were many challenges, whether they were sight or walking or other illnesses, that Blossom, as a mother, had to help her through towards the end, and she wouldn't have made it without the people who were mentioned, and Libby and Wendy in particular. But Hope was always Hope. From the very beginning until the very end, she was truly herself. And I decided that she should be brought into this room, not only through everyone's speeches, but through the rock garden that was in her room.
All right, thank you so much. Let's thank our presenters again today, like Gay McDougall, Zena Miller. Yeah. Special thanks to the Planning Committee, Livy Adler, Wendy Parmet, Zena Miller, Deborah Ramirez, and Margaret Burnham. Thank you so much for everyone for coming and participating in this event, and I encourage you to come to the Valerie Gordon event next week. Thank you again.